on Nova. Solar system.
Our solar system is filled with these strange worlds that defy all expectations.
The images were shocking. It doesn't seem to follow any of the rules.
And sometimes we don't understand which rules can be broken.
Strange worlds on Nova.
I'm Steve Goldstein, host of The Press Room. I've been a journalist and reporter in Arizona for the better part of 3 decades, and have lived here almost my entire life. That's why I'm excited to host The Press Room every Friday night on PBS 6 and NPR 89.1. It's a weekly roundtable discussion of the top news stories from Southern Arizona, featuring in-depth analysis and a recap of the week's top news headlines. The Press Room, Friday nights at 8:30 on PBS 6 and simulcast on NPR 89.1 and AZPM.org.
With the 2024 election season in full swing, AZPM's podcast Fact Check Arizona is back with new episodes every week. Whether it's a media outlet, elected official, or candidate, Fact Check Arizona will cut through the noise and let you know what's fact or fiction all the way through this election season. With context and in-depth analysis, Fact Check Arizona has you covered. Download and listen at azpm.org/podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
On Masterpiece Mystery.
No! It's my neighbor. I think someone's shot him.
Mrs. Potts, I can't have you interfering.
Judith Potts.
Susie Harris.
I'm Bex Starling, the vicar's wife.
I'm trying to find out who killed my neighbor.
And you've decided to have a little poke around.
Every time I see you, there are more of you.
We're not going to stop investigating, are we?
You couldn't have just started a book club, could you?
The Marlowe Murder Club, a new series on Masterpiece Mystery.
I think AZPM is really important to Southern Arizona because it provides not just the national news that I'm interested in, but also the local news. This morning, I actually got online and I went to NPR to figure out, what is happening in Tucson this morning that I need to know about. It takes a little bit of money from all of us collectively to make a really big impact and to keep the great programming and to keep the independent news that is personally really important to me.
It shows us something between what you see and what you don't see.
This is the story of the most curious man in history.
The influence of Leonardo's vision was enormous.
He's doing things no one had ever done before. And that is simply astounding.
Throughout human history, much of the globe has been surprisingly hospitable. Humans, of course, have lived in all kinds of extreme places, but dense population centers have largely been concentrated in the human climate niche. That's the planet's Goldilocks zone, with average temperatures between 11 and 15 degrees Celsius. But as the Earth warms, extreme heat is already threatening even our most hospitable regions. In 2021, the Pacific Northwest was struck by a heat wave so extreme that some scientists believe it wouldn't have been possible without global warming. And typically hot places like Houston, Texas, and Miami, Florida may soon become nearly unlivable. By 2100, these cities are projected to see several months of dangerous heat every year. But researchers may have a solution. I'm Maiya May, and I'm fascinated by our dynamic planet, our weather, and our climate. What began as a career in broadcast meteorology has become a mission to figure out where we are and where we're going as we leave this long, stable climate period and enter the hockey stick era. So join me on an international investigation as we learn what cities can do to prevent heat deaths. We'll also learn how extreme heat waves are formed and how a once war-torn city in Colombia is turning the temperature down. On a hot day, there isn't any shade at all.
I just want to take a whole pano of this. I've never seen anything like this. Amazing.
So in 2021, right where I'm standing, a neighbor's camera caught the final moments of 36-year-old Ashlyn Maddox. And she was dropped off here by a medical ride-to-care service. 2 hours after that, she was back here circling the area disoriented right before she fell unconscious. And the high temperature that day was 116 degrees. And this is 9 degrees above the previous record.
We are talking an extremely dangerous heat wave. And the reason for that is the folks in the Pacific Northwest and British Columbia are not used to this type of heat.
And Ashlyn died of extreme heat exposure. She lost consciousness just 50 feet away from her air-conditioned home. But there's more to the story than extreme heat and heat-related illness. When Ashlyn died, she was found with a McDonald's bag and a drink that still had ice in it. That's a clue about the last moments of her life. And what she did during those moments actually tells us a lot about how to make our cities more livable as temperatures set record after record. So this is the route that Ashlyn would have walked to go get food at McDonald's. And you can tell that there's just a ton of asphalt, a lot of impermeable surfaces, a lot of traffic, a lot of cars. We don't know for sure what happened, but if she did walk to that McDonald's, she would have likely been walking for over an hour along a very busy, very hot section of highway with very little shade. At that time, it was around 116 degrees at the Portland airport. But in other parts of town without many trees, researcher Vivek Shondis recorded a much hotter air temperature of 124 degrees. We'll get into why that corridor was so much hotter than other places in the city, but first, a bit more about heat as the world warms. We can identify two categories of cities. First, the already hot places like Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Miami.
These places that are already really hot and already sort of getting close to the limits of some of the ecosystems and people living there, we're shifting those temperatures hotter. And so people have to rely even more on things like air conditioning in order to make these places livable.
But how does the other category of more temperate places like Portland suddenly transform into one of the hottest places on Earth? The answer is a heat dome. Normally, our weather systems are pushed from west to east by the jet stream. But sometimes the jet stream develops large wavy patterns or meanders, essentially trapping weather systems.
What happens when we get a heat wave is that we have one of these high pressure systems that basically stops moving. So it stops propagating towards the east and it becomes roughly stationary and just stays in one place. And if it's strong enough and stays in place for long enough, you can get these very extreme temperatures.
The trapped high pressure system acts like a lid, evaporating clouds and bringing clear skies. Normally, the moisture in the soil and plants moderates heat as it evaporates. But if the high pressure system stays stuck in place long enough, this moisture gets depleted and the sun's energy goes directly into heating the air and temperatures skyrocket.
The 2021 heat wave in the Pacific Northwest was one of the most extreme heat waves across the planet. There's a lot of scientific disagreement about this at the moment, but some estimates put it at an event that would, on average, happen once every 100,000 years. It broke the Canadian national record by 4.6 degrees Celsius. This was absurd.
There's growing evidence that climate change is slowing the jet stream and causing more meanders, like the one that caused the 2021 heat dome. What we do know is that we're seeing more hotter heat waves, especially where most of us live. Extreme heat is especially deadly in cities, and that's because of the urban heat island effect. And this is where our built infrastructure amplifies warming by around 2 to 5 degrees during the day and up to 22 degrees Fahrenheit at night. That means heat-trapping aspects of our cities more than double the current level of global warming, making heat waves even more deadly. Researcher Vivek Shondis has a fascinating perspective on heat, especially in cities, and this gives us insight into what's going wrong. and how we can actually cool cities down.
Heat kills more people than any other natural hazard, many other natural hazards combined, in fact, where we modeled out the health-related costs associated to extreme heat across the metropolitan areas of the country, and we're finding that there's a 8 to 10-fold increase in the number of heat-related illnesses by 2040. That's at the kind of global scale. When we start getting into cities a little bit more, we start seeing these thermal anomalies, these differences in temperature between one neighborhood and another, one street and another.
Back in 2021, Vivek revealed the shocking temperature difference between a wealthy neighborhood and a much lower income area in Portland using a weather instrument he and his team designed.
Well, we found a temperature difference of about 25 degrees, which is the largest air temperature difference I had ever recorded in this city.
This is the intersection that recorded that 124-degree temperature. That was the hottest temperature recorded during last year's heat dome. There aren't a lot of trees here, so there's not a lot of shade in this neighborhood, and you got a lot of pavement. Let's actually compare this neighborhood to the coolest neighborhood. Here it is, the coolest neighborhood with an air temperature of 99 degrees. There's tons of trees in this neighborhood, and it's surrounded by forests.
So cities are doing all kinds of things to try to turn the temperatures down. You can do a lot of engineering, and you'll eventually land on the fact that trees are probably your best solution. It really comes down to that.
It doesn't take a scientist to know that trees have a dramatic cooling effect, but the mechanics of how this works are pretty fascinating. First and most obvious is shade. Trees block solar radiation from reaching the ground, so heat isn't absorbed by sidewalks and roadways. Second is transpiration. This is where water is taken up by tree roots, eventually evaporating through the leaves. Energy used in this chemical reaction actually consumes heat energy that would otherwise raise air temperatures. Transpiration can reduce heat by up to 8 degrees Celsius. Back east of Portland, Ashlyn can be seen walking east on her neighbor's security camera in the direction of McDonald's. We'll never know for sure if she walked there to get the meal she was found with, but if she did, it would have been on this route. The lack of trees in this area pushed temperatures from an uncomfortable 99 degrees to somewhere closer to the 124 degrees Vivek recorded in a similar part of town. So, with the projections of increasing fatalities from heat in the future and the proven cooling effect of trees, I assume that cities across the US would be actively increasing tree cover, especially in vulnerable low-income communities.
Overall, we're seeing a consistent decline of trees in our cities. In a world that's continuing to heat up is a scary trend.
And Vivek and others found that the neighborhoods with the fewest trees are almost always lower-income neighborhoods and communities of color.
You would think that with a clear scientific evidence around the loss of tree canopy occurring in not only Portland, but around the country, that we would be bringing a lot more trees into those hot neighborhoods. We studied 33 cities across the United States where we had really defensible scientific data, and we were looking at, did trees get increase and did green space increase in those areas, or did we see a decline? And in the hottest cities and in the hottest neighborhoods, we found a consistent decline of tree canopy. Those are the places that are actually losing the most trees in the region.
They're losing trees.
They're losing trees in the hottest places.
We have all the information, but we're just not, the US isn't getting it right. Are there any other cities outside of the US that we can look to as an example of how to do this right?
One place that I've been thinking about a lot is Medellin in Colombia, and that's one of these places where they have attempted to reorganize transportation networks, housing patterns in service to keeping the tree canopy intact. How is a city continuing to grow, but yet maintaining large portions of their tree canopy and keeping those old large trees that provide all of these benefits in place?
So we invited Vivek, one of the world's leading authorities on urban heat, to go to Colombia to try to figure this out. The city claims that their Green Corridors program has cooled their average temperature by 2 degrees Celsius. But is that true? And if so, how did a city mostly known for drug cartels make this happen? Today, Medellin has transformed into a vibrant city now known globally for its innovative urban development, culture, and breathtaking landscapes. Part of the city's transformation has been their Green Corridors program, started in 2016 to address air pollution. The program connects green spaces in the city with tree-lined streets and shaded avenues, a strategy we mostly fail to implement in the US.
All right, so we're here at City Hall, and behind me is a green wall. And this is one of the many innovations that the city of Medellin has implemented to help cool air temperatures and to improve air quality.
Everywhere we went, we collected temperature data. We drove all over the city, checking out their parks, transportation corridors, and creative greening of public spaces. Vivek's done this work all over the world to study urban heat, and he seemed immediately impressed.
I would walk to work in this.
Oh, yeah.
Like, oh my goodness, this would be a great place to get around. What's really cool is they're able to integrate multimodal transportation with green space in the same street segment. Shaded bike lane, shaded walkway, and then fast bus and car route.
The oldest palm tree in Medellin. It's right here. Not a lot of shade, so I understand why there aren't more of those here.
As we moved throughout the city, it was clear that Medellin had invested a lot of time and money in their green corridors. But we wanted to see what this investment looked like in Medellin's poorest communities.
So I'm going to be really looking for green space, presence, absence in these lower income neighborhoods.
Wow.
Wow.
Look at this.
Totally different scene than what we had seen before.
Very different.
Yeah.
Very different. In an area like this, what do you expect to see on the temperature gauge?
What I'm seeing around me is a lot of brick, a lot of cinder block, a lot of concrete and asphalt. And so what we'd see here is a built environment that essentially traps the heat and holds on to it. So this area is actually going to be in some ways much warmer than the lowland areas. The priority here is clearly housing, like people need places to live. And so green space becomes then in some ways a luxury.
But just on the other side of the bridge, the city has invested in revitalizing a green space. Squeezed between dense development was a terrace garden with maintained plants, trees, and shade.
It's a lot.
It's very cool.
It's cool. You feel it, right? It's like just that little drop. We're already in a valley. It's like the water, the trees, the breeze.
The breeze is very nice.
That's really nice.
Nearby, we visited another pocket park, and we began to understand that the city's greening every available space, even in dense, unplanned, low-income neighborhoods.
I just want to take a whole pano of this. I've never seen anything like this. Amazing, amazing. I keep seeing more and more of these gardeners that are here actively working on this space. And I have not seen anything like this in a public space in a low-income neighborhood with this level of concerted effort in my life. It's really, really a phenomenal moment.
We started to understand just how aggressive Medellin is with adding green space, and it definitely feels like it's working. But the only way to know for sure is to measure it. Fortunately, this is kind of Vivek's thing. So we met up with a fellow heat researcher and Medellin local, Carlos Cadena, to compare temperatures along two contrasting routes.
We'll hop on one car along one of the green corridors, and then at the same time, we'll do a non-green corridor in one of the other cars, and we'll take some measurements. You can definitely start seeing the difference. In a couple of blocks, you'll start seeing much more green.
There is absolutely no trees here. This is completely just buildings and concrete. This is definitely one of the most congested, lively areas with the least amount of tree cover, for sure. Oh, there is so many people. This kind of reminds me of New York. And on a hot day, there isn't any shade at all.
Back in Portland with Vivek, we looked at our data to learn just how well the city's interventions were working.
Both of the vehicles started down here in the southern end of the map, and looks like they took off different directions.
Even on the relatively mild day that we drove those routes, what we saw was a roughly 7 to 8 degree difference between the greener, cooler route that Vivek drove and the hotter one that I drove.
And I was definitely along this road here.
Lots of red there.
And it looks like the hottest temperature. So what is that, a 7 to 8 degree difference?
Yep, that's right.
I zoomed in here. This is actually right along here in another one of those hottest sections. And yeah, you can see a lot of people going out. I don't see any trees in all 4 directions.
Medellin still has a long way to go, to be sure, but it's inspiring to see that they're actually increasing tree cover and that it's working. So why aren't we? Well, Medellin has one clear advantage when it comes to growing trees: rain. Trees here grow faster with less effort than drier places. Medellin gets over 60 inches of rain per year. But some of the hottest parts of the US are also the driest. These areas in the Southwest are home to over 14 million people and receive less than 10 inches of rain per year. Phoenix might be the most extreme example, with 55 days over 110 degrees and 645 heat-related deaths in 2023 alone. So I wanted to find out what heat adaptation strategies are effective in such a dry place. We visited the city in 2020 during the 110-degree heat wave to see what they were doing to cope.
No large city faces higher summer temperatures than Phoenix. As such, we're trying to think of Phoenix as an innovation laboratory. The ideas for coping with extreme heat may very well come from here out of necessity. We need to find the solutions before other cities as we head into a warmer future.
One relatively simple solution is to use more reflective surfaces, like white roofs, which can reflect up to 80% of sunlight. This not only cuts energy bills by keeping buildings cooler, but this also redirects heat away from street level. Another reflective technology where Phoenix really is a laboratory is reflective pavement. David took us to check out the city's pilot project.
So we're here in a residential neighborhood near downtown Phoenix, where some of this cool pavement has just been applied. The sun's been up for only 3 hours now. Traditional pavement is about 125 degrees Fahrenheit, plenty warm already. We'll come over to this cool seal pavement, and it is 121. That's gonna grow over the day to be upwards of 15 degrees Fahrenheit by the time we get to sunset.
But researchers discovered a bit of a catch during an experiment while using a robot called Marty.
Marty measures mean radiant temperature. Mean radiant temperature is the heat load that a body receives when it's outdoors.
They used Marty to measure the effects of the city's reflective pavement. It turns out that heat reflected by the new pavement bounces and warms the atmosphere at around the same height as humans. So while it can help in certain situations, it can also hurt in others.
Now we're getting hit not only by the sunlight coming in from above, but also from the sunlight being reflected off the pavement, which could actually make the conditions worse for our bodies.
Ariane showed us one more shocking set of measurements that helps to confirm the importance of urban forests.
The mean radiant temperature here, what we just measured at close to 170 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's the temperature your body experiences, the heat load your body experiences.
We then moved from the exposed asphalt to a greener part of town.
So here we have an air temperature of 40 degrees Celsius, which is about 104 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's much cooler here in the shade with all the vegetation in the surroundings.
That's around a 66-degree less heat load than Marty measured on the pavement in the full sun. This massive difference helps us to understand what Ashlyn would have experienced back in Portland before she collapsed.
Trees have to be a part of the mix. There are a lot of trees that are drought resistant. I've worked in the Middle East in some of the hottest environments in the world and seen cities bringing trees in that do really well in these very arid environments.
But is it worth the resources to grow trees in the dry desert? Just a couple of hours down the road in Tucson, Brad Lancaster may have the answer.
Welcome.
How are you doing?
Good.
Maiya.
Great to meet you.
Good to meet you.
Yeah.
This is amazing.
Oh, thanks.
This is, you've really cultivated this forest in a dry place. Can you show me?
Sure. Let's start out in the street, see what we've done out here.
We just got done talking about trees and all the benefits, why they're important, all the shade they provide. They help with improving the air quality as well. And I think some people, especially people who live in the Southwest, may watch that and feel like, oh, that's not really realistic for us because we live in a dry place that has water issues. But we're seeing here that this is actually a possibility.
Yeah, this works everywhere. So let me just show you over here. The average neighborhood street in Tucson, like this one right here, drains over 1 million gallons of rainfall per mile per year. And if we direct that water to plantings as opposed to storm drain, that is more than enough water to create and freely irrigate a continuous canopy of native food-bearing vegetation, trees, shrubs, and understory.
That's amazing.
So there used to be a driveway here, and water, when it flows, will flow along the street gutter, and then, since water moves downhill with gravity, it moves into here. And this is the basin. And this whole basin, all the way back there, fills up with water. It's up to 2 feet deep back there. And the key thing, too, is here we're selecting native species, the plants that are native to this area. So they're the best adapted to our climate, soil, and wildlife. And by selecting the natives already adapted to here, they can not just survive, but thrive on rainwater and street runoff alone.
I love that.
From Medellin's green corridors to Brad's permaculture forest in the desert, I've learned that there is so much that we can do to combat urban heat, even on our increasingly hot planet, and that trees are a crucial part of the solution, no matter where you live. In the next episode, we'll return to the hot, arid Southwest to find out how climate change creates dangerous flooding while the region's water crisis grows deeper. As the climate warms, a little-known law of physics spreads this phenomenon across the US and the globe. So join us as we learn what the future of water and food will look like as the world warms.
Weathered, Earth's Extremes was made possible in part by a grant from Anne Ray Foundation, a Margaret A. Cargill philanthropy, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everybody. I assume there are people out there. I'm here with Brad Lancaster. I know Brad's here, so we're going to have a conversation. And yeah, thanks for staying for this Q&A with Brad Lancaster. We're really lucky to have him here with us. You got a little taste of Brad at the end of that video, but we'll take a much deeper dive, and we'll have time for a Q&A if you have questions for Brad. I'll just start by introducing myself. My name is David Fenster. I'm the nature and environment producer on the show Arizona Illustrated, which some of you may have seen on AZPM. And and I'm here with Brad Lancaster. Brad's an author, a designer, a landscape designer, an educator, among other things. Brad's book, which I have here, Rainwater Harvesting for Dry Lands and Beyond. I have volume 1 here. There's volume 1 and 2. It's an incredible book. And is that volume 2? Yeah. Soon to be available in Spanish as well. So yeah, I highly recommend the book. I'll talk about that more in a minute, but also wanted to let you know if you wanted more information about what Brad does and how you can get involved. You can check out 2 of his websites, harvestingrainwater.com and neighborhoodforesters.org. And the way I've come to know Brad is we worked on a film, or on a half-hour Arizona Illustrated special called Water Harvester. And you can watch that. It's free. If you type in Water Harvester AZPM, it should come up. Like I said, it's a half-hour documentary. But yeah, I basically, during the pandemic, my wife and I had just bought our first home. There was almost no landscaping. It was pretty much just dirt. And someone gave me a copy of Brad's book, and I had a lot of time on my hands, and I figured, like, what do I have to lose? So I started implementing some of the water harvesting that you saw in the video, and it was miraculous. In a couple years, it went from just bare dirt to a pretty lush oasis. And now it's been about 5 years, and it's, there's huge mature trees that were a foot tall when I put them in, and it continues to kind of amaze me what's possible here. But I'll start with a couple questions, and then if you want, I believe you can just type into the chat if you have questions. So put those in there, and I can ask Brad those questions for you. But yeah, Brad, I was hoping you could just start. Like I said, we kind of got a little taste of what you do in that video, but it's really just the tip of the iceberg. Maybe you can start with a fuller view of kind of what you do, and maybe you start with a fact that always blows my mind that you shared with me, which is that Tucson gets more rainfall in a year than the entire city uses in a year, and sort of how that gets to trees and to cooling the temperature eventually.
Yeah, so if you just calculate how much rain falls on the surface area of Tucson, and then you divide that by 365 days of the year, and divide that again by the population of Tucson's over 500,000 inhabitants, you realize that more rain falls on the surface area of Tucson in an average year than the population of Tucson consumes of municipal water in an average year. So we have this huge abundance that we squander. So the fact that we're getting all that rain isn't good enough because unfortunately the majority of our built environment is designed to very rapidly drain that water off site. So we very quickly lose that gift that fell from the sky. But if we tweak things, so we instead turn drains into sponges and change the microtopography from hills to more basin shapes, then we can retain rather than drain that precious rainfall resource and do it in a way that dramatically reduces flooding at the same time. And what's also essential about all this, which they were touching on in the video episode, is the longer that we can bank moisture in our soils and our vegetation, the more moisture there is to offset that incoming radiation of the sun. And that moisture can help turn from a liquid to a vapor through transpiration, and consume that incoming heat energy from the sun in the really hot months, and instead turn it into transpiring, evaporating water that can lead to more cloud generation and more rain. I'll just throw, sorry, maybe being a little too technical here, but just throw one other little detail is the more vegetation we have, then the more beneficial bacteria we have that resides in the stomata of the plant's leaves. And that bacteria is the ideal rain seeding element. So it is updrafted way up into the atmosphere, and it's the perfect size and surface around which evaporating, transpiring moisture can condense and form a cloud. So we can get that, that cloud can diffuse incoming heat from the sun, and it can rain on us and help continue this cooling cycle. So let's partner with that amazing planetary system rather than unconsciously thwarting it. And so that's a goal in a lot of my work.
And can you talk about how you've kind of come to all this work? Because it's kind of an interesting story, and the way it kind of almost started in your backyard and expanded into your neighborhood of Dunbar Spring and kind of beyond now into the city.
Sure. So I after college, I took a class in permaculture, which is a methodology of sustainable design that tries to mimic and collaborate with the living systems that sustain us. And I had learned about water harvesting, got really intrigued by that, but didn't get enough info, wanted more. So I sought out practitioners around the world and all, and that I could study from. And I just happened to be going to South Africa because my mother was from South Africa, and there was a family reunion going on there. So I took the opportunity, since I was in the area, to reach out to practitioners in the dry lands over there to see how they were adapting to that climate, very similar to ours. And I heard about the water farmer, Mr. Zephaniah Piri Maseko, and an innovator in the driest region of Zimbabwe. So I sought him out, and he was very open to showing me the work that he and his family had done, where they basically taught themselves, their subsistence farmers taught themselves how to plant the rain rather than drain the rain. So they plant the rain with simple rain gardens, earthworks, as opposed to those draining shapes. And they did not have the resources to put in pumps to access groundwater or canals to bring in water from distant surface waters. They only could use what was there, the rain. And by capturing it, reinvesting it, cycling it, mimicking the natural hydrologic system of the planet, they were able to turn an eroding wasteland into a thriving oasis that's watered just by the rain. And Mr. Peary, he says, you know, when I was touring the site with him, he said, Brad, this is a water plantation. My primary crop is the rain. And but that's the foundation that enables all the rest of this life to thrive. So I was so inspired by him, and also kind of spiraling in my head of how frustrated I was of the worsening water situation in Tucson, that I said, hey, I'm thinking of leaving. Do you have any tips on how I could figure out where to go? And he slapped me on the shoulder. He said, well, you can't go. Because if you run away from your problems, you're just they'll follow you, and you'll just plant problems everywhere you go. You need to figure out how to turn things around, how to find and generate solutions for those problems. And because I had seen the work he and his family had done just with by hand and hand tools, the transformation that they had made, I knew such change was possible. I just needed to figure out how to tweak it to the unique conditions of my locale. So I resolved to come home and try and do the Mr. Peary miracle where I lived. And have been working at that ever since.
And yeah, this I just thought of this question. It's not something I thought to ask you, but I don't think we've ever talked about this. You obviously have like formal academic education and in some of these areas, but then a lot of your knowledge and it seems to come from mentors and also experimenting like with your own land or trying things out. Can you talk a little bit about like the difference between those types of getting information or getting knowledge or experience? They're both valid, but I feel like you have a nice balance of the two and can kind of speak to the strengths of each one.
Sure. So actually in college, I didn't study anything directly related to what I do now. So once I got out of college, I was still kind of clueless. Well, what am I going to do with my life? Um, and it was kind of that permaculture course that was kind of a turning point for me because that course was based on trying to find solutions rather than articulating problems. But Mr. Peary took it to and his family took it to a whole nother level for me because they were figuring it out on their own, and their constraint, which ended up being their leverage bar, is they could only use what was freely at hand because they didn't have the resources to bring stuff from elsewhere, which was this incredible uh, activating force, or that they basically had to get creative to figure out, well, what do we do? And it's so different from what I typically experience in the Western world, where we tend to want to buy ourselves out of a problem. So rather than really addressing the problem, we kind of deflect it and look to just bring in more resources, rather than really addressing the problem at its core. So I was extremely grateful for having that opportunity to interact and learn from Mr. Peary and his family. And so when I strove to plant the rain and plant water here in Tucson, I made very simple strategies the foundation of my work. So basically, what anyone with an able body could do with just simple hand tools, so that it would be accessible to the greatest number of people. And then, along with Mr. Peary, the local ecology became another one of my greatest teachers. Seeing how does the plant life, how's the animal life, the insects and whatnot, how have they adapted to these conditions of extreme heat and cold and drought? How could I similarly strive to adapt? Um, and how could I co-evolve with these incredible life forms that are already so far ahead of me? And it was also, well, let's look at the indigenous culture of this place. And another great mentor became Clifford Pablo, who is a traditional Auction runoff farmer on the Autumn Nation. And he was very generous in sharing with me how his grandfather taught him to grow very productive crops, just using passively harvested rain and runoff diverted from an ephemeral arroyo onto the adjoining floodplain, which gave him not only water in those storm pulses, but also incredible nutrients and fertilizer from the rabbit poop and the leaf drop that was flowing in that water. And Clifford and his family had, similarly to Mr. Peary, over many generations, learned to do the most with what's freely at hand and the other life forms that are already here. So when we're pulling water off the street to irrigate street side and in-street plantings, we're mimicking the traditional auction runoff farming that Clifford and his grandfather practiced. And it's just that instead of a unpaved desert arroyo, we're using a paved street. And we're having to strategically cut through or drill through the concrete curb that is segregating the paved waterway from the plantable floodplain. We need to reunite them. So we create those basins lower than the street and then make holes in the street curb to bring street runoff into street side basins, street side or in-street basins, which and we size these so they are large enough to capture more than enough water for all the trees and understory plants that we plant within them. So there will actually be a surplus that will be able to infiltrate beyond the root zone. So we are able to directly recharge our groundwater by not taking water from it in the first place, and then directly recharge it with that surplus water that migrates past the root zone and can make it eventually to the groundwater table. So it's a banking of water that can help cool us, and it's a growing of that canopy that can help cool us as well. And one last thing is we strive to prioritize the planting not only of well-adapted native plants, but those that have historically used by the Audom and early Spanish settlers and many others. We look to the native plants that they use for food, medicine, wildlife habitat, craft materials, and so forth. So we prioritize those. So we're literally growing rain irrigated native food forests, medicinal forests, craft forests, just using what was before just shot out of the system and lost, but we're cycling it again and again.
And it looks like we have a couple questions, but I don't know if the people who wanted to ask them are able to type them into the chat. If you don't know how to do it, there's if you look at the bottom of the screen, there's a icon and it says chat underneath it. If you just click on that, you should be able to type in your questions. But while we wait for people to type their questions in, maybe you could talk about, like, if people are inspired by what you're talking about or by the video that they saw of your property and your neighborhood, like what's a good first step to take for somebody who's interested in maybe doing something with their backyard or their front yard, or just on a piece of land they have access to?
Yeah, well, a real simple thing can be just get out in a rainstorm and put on some rain gear and see how the water flows and see where it's flowing, and it's potentially a resource where it's helping collect around plants and help water them for free. And where is it maybe a problem or a challenge? Where is it draining towards a structure that you don't want flooded? And then how might you tweak that? So my favorite time to do this work is in a rainstorm. I grab my bathing suit and a shovel and I start moving dirt and watching how that changes things. In times of no rain, you can eyeball it. You can put a tennis ball or something on the surface if it's smooth enough and see how it rolls. And then I start playing with changing the microtopography so water's going to where I want it. And if I dig a basin, I'm going to take the dirt I dug out of that basin to raise maybe a pathway or a patio or a driveway where I don't have plants, I don't have a need for the water. And then as I raise them, I slope them to direct their runoff water to an adjoining planting area. And I'm also looking for, where do I most need shade, for that passive cooling effect. So along streets, it's great because I can use the street runoff to increase available rainfall by 3 to 10 times. Because I'm not just getting the direct rainfall, I'm getting the water off that large catchment surface of the street beside the planting area. I can do it for homes. I especially want to get shade trees on the east and west sides of the buildings to shade them from the morning and afternoon sun. in the summer months when it's lower in the sky and just blasting those walls directly without protection from the roof. And in times of no rain, I can boost the whole system by directing household gray water to those same rain gardens, those same basins. So what's gray water? Gray water is the lightly used water that goes down the drains of your sink, shower, or bathtub. Or instead of directing that water to the sewer, I mean, you've already paid for it, you've hardly used it at all. What if you instead redirect that to the landscape? And you've already changed the topography to create these rain garden shapes to capture the rain and the stormwater runoff. They can collect the gray water in the dry times. So it's another means of cycling the water, using it again and again in a way that continually improves its quality rather than degrading it. And feeding more vegetation that can clean and that water as well, and then just transpire it back up into the air to cool us and generate more clouds and rain.
Yeah, I feel like we're lucky in Tucson too, because we have so many resources that I mean, I don't think other cities have in terms of native plant nurseries. We have a lot of really passionate people who run native plant nurseries, Desert Survivors and Spadefoot Nursery and many others. And we have, I mean, we do have these gray water I guess laws on the books, right? That you kind of, any new construction has to have gray water and even has to have rainwater harvesting. I guess, oh, hold on one sec. Okay, so Patty is going to ask a question. Here you go. Okay, Patty, just unmute your microphone and go ahead.
Patty, to unmute your microphone in the lower left, you'll see a little microphone icon that probably has a red slash through it. And so click the microphone or the little arrowhead next to it to unmute it, to remove that red slash. Uh-oh.
All right, well.
You're still muted, Patty, unfortunately. Hey, there's Don. I know
Don, too. Don, do you want to unmute and ask a question? Click that.
Oh, looks like Don.
There you go, Don. Go ahead, Don.
Hello, Brad. How you doing?
Hey, Don. Good to hear your voice.
Here's my question. So I arrived here in Arizona in 1981. And when I was working the landscaping industry during that time, you could pretty much check your watch with the rain. My friend who lived for much of his life in Tucson said, okay, it's 2 o'clock. It's raining in Tucson. You better get ready because it's going to be raining here at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But then in the 90s, that all went out of the window, and then steadily, year by year by year, the rains have been held away by the heat island effect. And now it's maybe showing up at 11 o'clock, midnight, 1, 2 in the morning, when the temperature has cooled down enough to allow the rain to propagate. What do we do about that?
Well, I think the hope in what you just shared is still getting the rain. It's just a different time in the cooler night hours rather than the day. What I've been doing to address that, what you're experiencing, is just to create as many passive strategies of high capacity. I try and make my rain gardens and so forth make their capacity large enough that if we get a really big surge of a storm, when I maybe am not up and about, maybe I'm not there. So set it up so it can capture that water when I'm not there, bank it, and start to cycle that through the vegetation. And then that resulting vegetation, I'm trying to, and have definitely succeeded to some extent, helps mitigate that heat island effect that you're talking about, that you're experiencing. So I'm trying to buffer these growing extremes by helping nudge more of that heat island buffering life as close as possible to our live, work, and play, and do it in a way that I'm using those storm surges, that free on-site rain, not imported groundwater, not imported Colorado River water, to be the water source. So I'm not taking water from anyone else. I know that was a bit of a long answer. And also the hope I see, as we're seeing these changes is, where do we have entry points to try and make a difference? And anywhere we've got a piece of land that's compacted and denuded or paved and denuded, is there a portion of that we can depave or lessen the compaction of, and start to create a sponge where there was previously a drain? And can we do it in a way that we start to offset that increasing paving, that increasing erasure of temperature buffering life, and actually bring more of that back, and in a way that we're learning in the process? Our neighbors see that, they learn too. So how can we be actively evolving, actively adapting to these global conditions by acting in a local way?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Nancy's, I think, unmuted now. So Nancy, if you want to go ahead and ask your question. We still don't hear you, Nancy. Well, looks like we only have a couple more minutes. We can do one more question. It looks like Wendy is on now. So Wendy, if you want to go ahead and ask your question, you just have to unmute.
Okay, you are not getting questions because we were told to go to Q&A, and it says the host has turned off Q&A.
Huh, okay.
So that's why you're not getting any questions. As far as the subject, in my church, they have the Sunday school kids are working at redirecting water to water the plants in the church, and we have a water harvesting tank. So we're working on that, and we have a fella by the name of Hans Huth who does the same. You know the name?
Yeah, Hans is a great guy.
Yeah.
He's doing great work.
Directing all this, so we know a little bit more about it than some others might. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just throw an additional shout out to Hans. Is he's been working to change the rules and the contracts with the landscape maintenance companies at his HOA to bring in more water harvesting strategies, and to get the landscape maintenance company to collaborate with them on that, rather than maybe unconsciously damaging some of that. So there's so many entry points at which we can start to shift by making small but strategic and effective changes.
Yeah, I don't think we have time for any more questions, but just really want to thank you, Brad, for coming here and doing this. And I'll let you kind of tell people a couple things if they want to find out more. We mentioned the website, we mentioned the book. If you want to go over to the Dunbar Spring neighborhood, there's amazing signage, and you can really see all of the curb cuts. You can see the basins. You can see how there's just incredible amount of tree cover and foliage, and it's all rainwater, right? There's just zero irrigation on all those basins. But yeah, is there anything else you want to give a shout out to, Brad, or if people want to learn more, where they can go?
Yeah, well, just to reiterate, the website's harvestingrainwater.com and also neighborhoodforesters.org. But, also just do web searches for, water harvesting and then the name of your local community to find local practitioners, because everyone's got their own take on it. And it's great to expose yourself to as many different efforts and viewpoints and strategies as possible. And then, let's aim to cross-pollinate and help lift the larger effort. I think it's great to go beyond just the theoretical by really trying to start practicing, figure out what's the easiest or the most alluring entry point for you, and just start going for it. And even if it doesn't work as you planned right off the bat, don't worry about it. Try and tweak it, keep learning. Experience is the best teacher. And I've learned plenty from just as much from mistakes as I have from successes. But once I make that mistake, I don't make it again. So I learned to work through that.